So we're quite far into the revolution now, and the course that it was going to take. We've had the king fail in his flight to Varennes, partly due to a deficiency in his own character, partly due to prevailing circumstances. The old dragoon drew away, recognising him and having the muster and energy to go after him and create the tumult which ultimately saw his capture and his return to Paris. And then finally we saw the beginnings of the populace in Paris, that murmuring for a republic, that constitutional monarchy with this king who wants to flee, who wants to go to the Austrians, who wants to go to the old aristocrats across the border in Mainz and Koblenz, namely the enemy, that this king should not be king at all, even in name, that France should be a republic. But before she can become a republic in a bloodbath, we need to look at how Parliament will resolve itself, because there are still those within it that believe in the pursuit of the constitutional monarchy, and that's what they've decreed in this summer of 1791. So without further ado, Volume 2, Book 5, Parliament First, Chapter 1, Grande Acceptation. A repentant Barnave triumvirate, Rabaults, Duports, throes, and indeed all constituent deputies did strain every nerve, but the extreme left was so noisy. The people were so suspicious, clamorous to have the work ended. And then the loyal right side sat feeble, petulant all the while, and as it were, pouting. So the Varennes episode has tipped the scales to the left. They're now in the moral ascendancy in the eyes of the people, because the king has genuinely threatened to join the enemy. The old loyal bodyguards are indeed dissolved. They didn't last long, did they? But now also the sans-culotic violent Grand Garde Française or Centre Grenadiers shall have their mittimus. So more churn, as even they are not seen to be good enough. They depart, these first soldiers of the revolution. Remember, they were instated after the insurrection of women in October 1789. There was a change that the royal bodyguard would be given over to Garde Française, and now they're changed again because they're seen as insufficient. They depart, these first soldiers of the revolution. They hover very dimly in the distance for about another year, till they can be remodelled, new-named, and sent to fight the Austrians. All that awaits us. Sans-culotic watchdogs, more like wolves being leashed and led away from his Tuileries. The Queen is still hopeful, though, for a new age for her son, right? It's clear now that Louis is beyond recompense. Even as a constitutional monarch, he's not going to last. But the son can be a constitutional monarch, can be a fresh renewal. And that was always the case in monarchies, even with absolute monarchies, that the new generation, the new king on the throne, can rejuvenate what is an otherwise decaying state. And so Marie Antoinette believes in this. She meets deputies who have built this constitution, denouncing unquiet Jacobinism, trusting well that its time is nigh done. Much is uncertain, questionable, but if the hereditary representative be wise and lucky, what is wanting to him will gradually be gained and added. So there's to be a biennial parliament. This is the parliament first, the parliamentary idea of dealing with this shift to the left, to be called a legislative, Assemblée Législative, with 745 members chosen in a judicious manner by the active citizens alone, and even by electing of electors still more active. Our first biennial parliament, which indeed has been in choosing since early in August, is now as good as chosen. So noble-minded were these lawmakers, cry some, and Solon-like, would banish themselves, so splenetic, cry more, each grudging the other, none daring to be outdone in self-denial by the other. So they all see themselves as Solon, a great lawmaker of ancient Athens. They see themselves in the same mould, but of course they disagree with each other. None of us can be king's minister, or accept the smallest court appointment for the space of 4, or at the lowest, and on long debate and revision, for the space of 2 years. So this is the sort of minutiae that they're dealing with, but it's important, because if you become king's minister for too long a time, you can grab that power in this chaotic churn that we're experiencing here. So moves the incorruptible sea green Robespierre. With cheap magnanimity he. Rousseau's statue is decreed, virtuous Jean-Jacques, evangelist of the contrat social, not Drouet of Varennes, nor worthy Latale, master of the old world-famous tennis court in Versailles. He is forgotten. So they go, instead of going for these actual men of action, as Carlyle would have seen it, Latale actually had the famous tennis court oath. It was Drouet who actively went after the king. Rousseau is just a writer from the paper age, but it's he who gets venerated. The National Constituent Assembly declares that it has finished its mission. We have reached September 1791. On the morrow morning, the new legislative will begin. A phantasm reality born of time as the rest of us are, flitting ever backwards now on the tide of time, to be long remembered of men, very strange assemblages, Sanhedrims, Amphictyonics, trade unions, ecumenical councils, parliaments and congresses have met together on this planet and dispersed again. But a stranger assemblage than this august constituent, or with a stranger mission perhaps, never met there. It was with the gospel of Jean-Jacques Rousseau in their pocket that they did so. Lafayette, for his part, will lay down the command. He retires, Cincinnatus-like, to his hearth and farm, but soon leaves them again. So Lafayette sort of is really having enough of where this revolution is going now. He was with it at the beginning, but he's looking around at the makeup of this legislative assembly, and he decides that a move for a Cincinnatus-like, that is, the Roman general who retired onto his farm, this is the move for Lafayette. But of course that won't last. National Guard, however, shall henceforth have no one commandant, so Lafayette doesn't even really get replaced by any one person. But all colonels shall command in succession month about. So this is the great churn, right? King's minister will be rotated quickly every 2 years. All colonels will be churned about their commandant every month. The hawkers sing Grande Acceptation monarchic constitution through these gay crowds. Our new biennial legislative begins to constitute itself on the 1st of October 1791. Chapter 2. The Book of Law. It has its right side and its left, the less patriotic and the more. For aristocrats exist not here or now. It spouts and speaks, listens to reports, reads bills and laws, works on its vocation for a season. But the history of France, one finds, is seldom never there. Unhappy legislative, what can history do with it? So Carlyle's saying, they finally said they have this constitution, and they're going to be a constitutional monarchy. They call themselves Legislative Assembly. They've worked out a lot of the minutiae. We've reached October 1791. Yet, despite, in their own time, they saw that the constitution would be ascendant. But as history, even by Carlyle's time, marks them, they're sort of a forgotten bunch. No one really talks about what they achieved in these months. Aesop's fly sat on the chariot wheel exclaiming, "What a dust do I raise?" So you can see Carlyle's belief there. They are the flies. The men of the Constituent Assembly, or the Legislative Assembly as it's called now, are the flies believing they're raising the dust, but actually it's the great churn of time, this great turning of regimes from old, stale, aristocratic French regime, the Ancien regime, to the new, but we're not at the new yet. These guys here in the Legislative Assembly are Aesop's fly on the wheel, thinking they're kicking up the dust, rather than just being one caught up in the motion of it. Great governors, clad in purple with fasces and insignia, are governed by their valets. A purple Nebuchadnezzar rejoices to feel himself now verily emperor. They are what? And they have come to do what? Things foolish and not wise. The purple Nebuchadnezzar is a reference to the king of Babylon, is forced by God to eat grass in the book of Daniel. What with flights to Varennes? What with days of poniards? Plot after plot, the people are left to themselves. And there's a lot of disgruntlement, but the question in the Legislative Assembly is, with the vote and a right to sit in the assembly, there's still a question of, ought every man to speak just because he can? And then, if not, Where is the cut-off point? There is still a modicum of talent, though, admits Carlyle. Fiery Mac Isnard is come. From the utmost southeast, fiery Claude Fauché. Our only Mirabeau now, though, is Danton, as we said earlier. Danton is the heir to Mirabeau, working as yet out of doors, so he's not in this assembly, whom some call Mirabeau of the Sans-Culotte. We have, in other characters Carlyle wants to mention that are worthy of note here, Captain Hippolyte Carnot, sent hither from the Pas-de-Calais with his cold mathematical head and silent stubbornness of will. Carlyle erroneously confuses him with his son, L.H. Carnot, where he talks about the mathematical side of him. Nor is Côte d'Oie and band of king's friends wanting Vaublanc, Dumas, Jacques, the honoured chevalier who loves liberty, yet with monarchy over it, the constituent monarch and his representatives. Still less is a Côte de Gauche wanting, extreme left, sitting on the topmost benches. Honour waits not on this mountain, nor as yet even loud dishonour. Hot Merlin from Thionville, hot Bazir, attorneys both. There's loyal Lacroix, there's Cambon likewise, in whom slumbers undeveloped such finance talent for the printing of assignats, father of paper money. So the assignat is the beginning of the paper money, right? So decoupling the franc from gold. War to the manor house. We have Lecointre and the intrepid draper of Versailles is welcome here, known since the opera repast and insurrection of women. Thuriot, too, Elector Thuriot, who stood in the embrasures of the Bastille. So we do have some returning characters who've seen a lot at this point, over 2 years into the revolution. Such lava welters red hot in the bowels of this mountain. So he sees these extreme left sat up at the top left, peering over the rest of the assembly, and in Carlyle's mind it is a mountain, but it's a mountain that is actually a volcano. The lava is weltering, it's smouldering underneath, it's ready to erupt. The number in total is 745. Their soul's wish was to live and work as the first of the French parliaments and make the Constitution march. So before now, it was about writing the Constitution, in which Carlyle gesticulated that they were doing nothing more than creating an assemblage of classified verbs and so on. But now they claim they actually have one. The problem goes from making it exist to making it march, making it actually function and do something. There will be a sputter of anti-royal enactment as to how they, for their part, will receive majesty. How majesty shall not be called sire any more, except they please. Denunciations, reprimandings of king's ministers or traitors, posed and real. All of this gets debated in the early weeks and days. Assembly decrees always qu'il y a urgence. Thereupon the assembly having decreed there is an urgence. So sort of national emergency, national state of urgency, constantly evoked. 2,000 odd decrees, as men reckon, within 11 months. The dangers of the country are now grown imminent, immeasurable. National Assembly, hope of France, is divided against itself. In such extreme circumstances, honey-mouthed Abbé Lamourette, new Bishop of Lyon, rises, whose name, Lamourette, signifies the sweetheart, or Delilah Doxy. He rises, and with pathetic honeyed eloquence, calls on all august senators to forget mutual griefs and grudges, to swear a new oath, and unite as brothers. Whereupon they all, with vivats, embrace and swear. So, we have one last chance to reconcile this legislative assembly as something that can actually work and make the Constitution march. And that peacemaker here is Abbé Lamourette. Like fated Eteocles Polynices' brothers, embracing though in vain. A reference there to the Seven Against Thebes by Aeschylus, where the two brothers, though embracing here, turn against each other, and it brings about the downfall of the pair of them. If the Constitution would but march! The old habits of France are gone, though, and new rights and mights are not yet ascertained, except in the paper theorem, nor can be in any sort till she have tried. So this is the Carlyle take. The old habits are gone, the old France is gone, never to return. But we still, because they're reckoning statutes to the likes of a Rousseau rather than a Drouet, we're still in the age of theory, the age of paper, hence the reference also to the assignats, which Cambon helped put in motion. So everything's paper, everything's on theory. Nothing is actually put into genuine practice as Carlyle sees it. And of course we're heading towards Napoleon in the long term, but there's a lot of churn to happen there. Napoleon is the man who can make a new France march, both figuratively and literally. These guys, they can't do it, but we don't know that they can't do it yet. We have to see their failures. Things bode ill for the marching of this French constitution, the French people, the French king. Thirdly, the French noblesse, and an assembled European world more largely. And with that, on to chapter 3, Avignon. What is that southern Provençal blood? So he's going to talk about Avignon, which is a strange district because of its history tied up with the papacy, so still technically papal lands, dating well back for hundreds of years. But the French want everything inside their territory to be solid. It's also why there was a difficulty in recognizing exactly who was in charge of the old lands out in Alsace-Lorraine. They had a dukedom out there which basically functioned as its own court until very recently in the 18th century. So that's why the likes of a Bouillé could exist out there in these strange lands which are within France but not wholly integrated into France. Avignon here is another example. So Paris wanted all integrated. Above all places, the unluminous combustion in Avignon and the Comtat Venasson was fierce. Papal Avignon, with its castle rising sheer over the Rhone stream. Beautifulest town with its purple vines and gold-orange groves. It has had its popes, its anti-popes, with their pomp. They've all dwelt in that castle. Laura de Sade went here to mass, her Petrarch, twanging and singing by the fountain of Vaucluse hard by. So it was here where Petrarch first saw his Laura and wrote the Canzoniere. Jourdan, the headsman, fled hither from that Châtelet inquest, from that insurrection of women. So Jourdan was an army officer who kind of fled to the south away from the tumult some 2 years ago. But whether Avignon cannot now cease wholly to be papal and become French and free? This is the question that I alluded to earlier, but the unique history of Avignon. In February 1790, the papal aristocrats had set up 4 gibbets for a sign. The people rose then in June. Gibbets we do see rise, and on one side and on the other. There are anti-constitutional placards that are up. And the statue of the Virgin is said to have shed tears, so there's still old Catholic France sentiment around Avignon because of its history, and they will act as an anti-revolutionary buffer to those who want it wholly integrated. It is horrible to behold the ancient dead, and Petrarch and Laura sleeping around it there, high altar and burning tapers looking down on it, the Virgin quite tearless and of natural stone colour. Lescuillet's friend or two rush off like Job's messengers for Jourdan and the national force. So they're going to basically try and break this last anti-revolutionary resistance. Lescuillet, all alone, lies there swimming in his blood at the foot of the high altar, pricked, with scissors, trodden, massacred. So Lescuillet is a defendant who got massacred in the middle of this. Pricked with scissors, trodden, massacred. He takes from Dampmartin. So that's where the history where he's getting this from. The corpse of Lescuillet, stretched on a bier, self-styled brigands of Avignon have done this. The ghastly head girth with laurel is borne through the streets. Patriot municipality dispatches official narrative and tidings to Paris. So the narrative control has happened by the Patriot municipality. The fact Lescuillet has been butchered, carried through the streets, pricked with scissors, corpse sprawled out on an altar, for heaven's sake. None of that makes the official narrative. So the control of the narrative is key because they want to keep people in Paris or elsewhere away from Avignon still for the revolution, for these brigands. Of course, then, as a result, there's short judgment, no appeal. There is brigand wrath and vengeance. And this situation in Avignon continues until the date that we are at, which is the 15th of November, 1791. Behold, friend, Dampmartin, which is the history that Carlyle is going to use for his little episode here on Avignon. The constitution is buckling, but towards those broad gates of Avignon, 3 new National Assembly commissioners following at safe distance in the rear. Avignon summoned in the name of assembly and law. Jourdan has to whisk himself through secret passages. For 3 days there is mournful lifting out and recognition amid the cries and movements of a passionate southern people, now kneeling in prayer, now storming in wild pity and rage. And Jourdan, coup tête, Him also we behold again after a day or two in flight through the most romantic Petrarchan hill country, vehemently spurring his nag. So he managed to escape to Avignon and stayed there for some 2 years or so, but now he has to escape from Avignon as the Central Assembly tries to gain control of the whole country. Jourdan himself remains unhanged, though, and gets loose again. Arles has its chiffon, so Arles, which is near Avignon, has its chiffon, so in symbolical cant, they name that aristocrat's secret association. Arles has its pavements piled up by and by into aristocrat barricades against which Rebequy, the hot-clear patriot, must lead Marseillais with cannon. The bar of iron has not yet risen to the top in the Bay of Marseille. Marseille is a real stronghold of revolution, but then slightly to the north you have the likes of your Arles and your Avignons, and they're still Catholic France. They don't like what's happening to the clergy. They don't like what's happening to old traditional France. But as Carlyle has already stated, old France is gone, but we're not yet in New France. These old hideouts, these last stands of Avignon, they're not going to be successful, but they're indicative of a people who are being pulled towards New France against their will. Young Barbaroux, advocate, town clerk of Marseille, being charged to have these things remedied, arrives at Paris in the month of February 1792. The beautiful and brave young Spartan, ripe in energy, not ripe in wisdom. That's kind of what you see from Marseille, led by Barbaroux. Think of all those workers on the docks, in the ports. It would have been fervent for the revolution. Chapter 4, No Sugar. Aristocrats more or less malignant, watched by patriotism. In all places too are distant priests, whom the legislative will have to deal with. So are the constitutionalist type up for the fight? King is one thing, priests are another. Northern can, not less by daylight, with aristocrats ranged in arms at places of worship, departmental compromise proving impossible. So it's not just in the south that we have this cling to the clergy. Poor Simoneau, mayor of Etampes, in his northern region, hanging out his red flag in some riot greens, is trampled to death by a hungry, exasperated people. Just an episode Carlyle picked up while reading the histories that made him stand up. You have this mayor of a starving town. In a desperate attempt to appease the revolution, he hangs out his red flag, but they trample him to death because they're after food. Déchiré, torn asunder, this poor country, France, and all it has. All that it was French. In black Saint-Domingo, before the variegated glitter in the Champs-Élysées was lit for an accepted constitution, there had risen, and was burning contemporary with it, quite another variegated glitter in nocturnal fulgur. The fulgur being the brilliant or flashing light. Levelling is comfortable, as we often say, levelling yet only down to oneself. Your pale white Creoles have their grievances, and your yellow Quaterons. You can see here Carlyle's opinion on the carnage of the levelling. And because Saint-Domingo rises and was crucial to the sugar trade, this is where we're getting chapter 4, No Sugar, from, because your revolutions now have spread to your whole system. So you've gone from starving because of harsh winters to now starving because people are actually revolting in crucial nodes of your trading system. So there's an astonishing dearth of sugar. The grocer, palpitant with drooping lip, sees his sugar taxé. Abstain from it? Yes, we patriot sections, all you Jacobins, abstain. So they try and turn this dearth of sugar, the Jacobins and the more extreme on the left, into a moral virtue, that you are abstaining from it, which in and of itself is quite ironic, considering at the same time that, they're going against the clergy, they're attacking them for being illogical, without reason, yet here they are bestowing the virtue of abstinence on the people, when actually they're just trying to make sure the people don't turn against them for the fact that there's no sugar. That the French constitutional march is very rheumatic, full of shooting, internal pains in joint and muscle, will not march without difficulty. Chapter 5, Kings and Emigrants. Extremely rheumatic constitutions have been known to march. So just because they're rheumatic, Carlyle's not going to wipe it off just from that fact alone. And they've kept their feet, though in a staggering, sprawling manner for long periods. What King Louis is cannot help being, readers already know, a king who cannot take the Constitution nor reject the Constitution. So he's going to hum and haw on the Constitution the same way he hummed and hawed on whether to fly to Varennes for ages. Barnave and your senatorial Jacobins speak earnestly into his ear, into the ear of the king. So these are the people, these are constituent who are trying to hold back the mountain, the lava mountain of Robespierre and his gang. Bertrand Molville and the messengers from Comblain speak earnestly into that. The poor royal head turns this side, one side, then the other. It can turn itself fixedly to no side. So he's getting ear from Barnave and those. Then he's getting ears from messengers from Coblentz, who are the pure old aristocratic class who have already fled and are in the Holy Roman Empire. He's turning his head left, he's turning his head right. Varenne has taught him nothing. The king has accepted the constitution at last, then, knowing beforehand that it will not serve. He studies it and executes it in the hope, mainly, that it will be found inexecutable. King's ships lie rotting in harbour, their officers gone. Bertrand Molville, himself, in a way he thinks very dexterous, contrives to pack the galleries of the legislative, gets sans-culottes hired to go thither. Here too let us note an unexpected apparition of Philippe d'Orléans at court, his last at the levee of any king. D'Orléans, sometime in the winter months, seemingly has been appointed to that old first coveted rank of admiral. So nobody had turned against his own class more than this man, Philippe d'Orléans. Monsieur take care of the dishes as if he had carried poison in his pockets. This was the reception he gets at his last showing at court. The insults which his presence everywhere excited forced him to retire without having seen the royal family. Philippe was a strong admirer of the British constitutional monarchy. He strongly advocated for France's adoption of this constitutional monarchy, rather than the absolute monarchy. But of course, he's not going to last long. This is the man who, during the revolution, is going to change his name to Philippe Égalité. This daydreamer, really, ultimately. Is he any different than your man who came in from the Netherlands, Klootz? Thought the Parisian Parlement would be an international parliament. The same delusion grasps them both from different sides. Rage and spite were seen visibly painted on his face as he left his aristocratic brethren for the last time. Is there not what one may call an Austrian committee sitting invisible in the Tuileries, centre of an invisible anti-national spiderweb? Constitution divided against itself which will never march, hardly even stagger. Why were not Drouet and Procureur Sauce in their beds that unblessed Varenne night? Why did they not, in the name of heaven, let the Corfe Berlin go whither it listed, nameless, incoherency, incompatibility, perhaps prodigies at which the world still shudders had been spared? Calonne, Breteuil, hovered dim, far-flown, overnetting Europe with intrigues. Calonne, if you recall, was in the 1780s an old Controller General of the Finances in the latter days of the Ancien Regime. He's now abroad, still hoping to get back. Great Burke has raised his voice long ago, eloquently demonstrating that the end of an epoch has come. To all appearance, the end of civilized time. It's, of course, Edmund Burke. Him many answer, Camille Desmoulins, Klootz, Speaker of Mankind, Paine, the rebellious, Thomas Paine, Needleman, and honourable Gallic vindicators in that country and in this. But the great Burke remains unanswerable. Quote, the age of chivalry is gone. Close quote. Carlyle quotes Burke's reflections there. And could not but go, having now produced the still more indomitable age of hunger. So Carlyle sums up this ridiculous position France is in by saying that they have the rights of man printed on cotton handkerchiefs. There are high potentates, Austrian and Prussian, with emigrants who are faring towards Pillnitz in Saxony. There on that's where the Elector of Saxony, his court, resided. There on the 27th of August, they keeping themselves what further secret treaty. So crucially, on the 27th of August, 1791, at Pilsnitz Castle near Dresden, Leopold II and Frederick William II signed an agreement threatening intervention against the French Revolution. So the idea of encirclement really begins to take hold. Our readers will remember the Pentecost night, 4th of August 1789. We're 2 years on from that, and look how much the world has changed. We had National Assembly, and abolishing feudalism of 1789 promised that the compensation should be given. Nevertheless, the Austrian Kaiser answers to his German princes, for their part, they cannot be unfeudalized. They have possessions in France Alsace. French Alsace, similar to Avignon, one of these historically messy parts of France. Where the Kaiser has possessions, he won't abolish feudalism, he has possessions inside the land of France. Austria and Prussia speak at Pillnitz, all men intensely listening. In England we have Lean Pitt and the Minister of Preparatives. They look out from this watchtower in the St. James's in a suspicious manner. We're right on the brink of the whole continent, can feel it. The birth of all this will be war. Emigrants at Coblentz, king's brothers, all princes of the blood except wicked d'Orléans, we discussed, Philippe Egalité. Your dueling de Castrier, your eloquent Cazal, bull-headed Malsen, these are the people who are actually at Coblentz. A war god Broglie, old leader of the armed forces there. Distaff seigneurs, insulted officers, all that have ridden across the Rhine stream. D'Artois welcoming Abbé Maury with a kiss. Ever since those first Bastille days when D'Artois went to shame for the citizens of Paris, has Coblentz swollen to the size of a phenomenon for the world. Coblentz is become a small extra-national Versailles. Versailles in Partibus. Maury assists in the Interior Council, so this is sort of a ministry in exile. And meanwhile the arms are hammering at Liège. France has not only no hierarchy or authorities to translate command into obedience, its hierarchy of authorities has fled to the enemies of France. Ranked at Coblentz from 15 to 20,000 stand now brandishing their weapons, of all which things a poor legislative assembly and patriot France is informed. Patriotism may brawl and babble yet a little while, but its hours are numbered. Europe is coming with 419,000 and the chivalry of France. The gallows, one may hope, will get its own. Chapter 6. Brigands and Jales. We shall have war then. And on what terms? In France the war minister is Narbonne. He of rose-coloured reports, solicits recruitments, equipments, money. Always money. We've reached the month of February 1792. Brissetans, friends, welcome their Dumouriez pour les métis. This is Dumouriez, le reste de son existence est une odyssée, fort agitée. So Dumouriez is one of the more loyal to the Republic. He stays on the Republican side, where Lafayette this time is beginning to question where he'll actually stand if it comes to full-scale war. But Dumouriez is the one the Republican, or what is still technically a Constituent Assembly, can rally to. Comparable really to an antique Ulysses in modern costume, quick, elastic, shifty. This is Dumouriez in Carlyle's eyes. Insuppressible, a many-counselled man. France, herself hand-shackled and foot-shackled in the weltering complexities of this social clothing or constitution. And yes, there's hunger too. The month of June next, the camp of Jales will step forth as a theatrically suddenly become real. 2,000 strong, and with the boast that it is 70,000. Most strange to see, with flags flying, bayonets fixed, with proclamation and D'Artois, Commission of Civil War. So the Commission of Civil War is royalist insurrection, backed by Louis XVI's émigré brothers, Provence and D'Artois, who signed a proclamation authorizing a mission at Coblentz on the 5th of May, 1792. That's what Carlyle is talking about here. In the months of February and March, though, before this, it is recorded that the terror, especially of rural France, had risen even to the transcendental pitch. There's Austrians, aristocrats, and above all the brigands are close by. If you were in any little town, this is constantly in your ear. It's the sphere. Men quit their houses and huts, rush, fugitive, shrieking, and with wife and child. They know not whither. Such a terror, the eyewitnesses say, never fell on a nation. Women prepare boiling water, moments to moments, expecting the attack. Chapter 7. Constitution will not march. Our poor legislative. They go on, debating, denouncing, objurgating, loud, weltering chaos which devours itself. On the 17th of January, the legislative, for one thing, got its high court, its haute cour, set up at Orléans, a court for the trial of public political offences. To this it was decreed that there needed no royal acceptance, therefore there could be no veto. So remember, we had that in the past, that the king would veto everything the constituent or national assemblies were trying to make. The legislative assembly has said, on this there is not going to be a veto. Less joyful are the laws against refractory priests. King's veto steps in with magical paralysis. 28th of October 1791, we have legislative proclamation issued by Herald and Bill Sticker, inviting Monsieur, the King's brother, to return. Of course, it's a trap. Within 2 months under penalties. To which the invitation, monsieur, replies nothing. Okay, so the king does not veto this. But the monsieur replies nothing. Then on the 9th of November, we declare all immigrants to be, quote, suspected of conspiracy. Will the king say veto? Monsieur is Deschaux forfeited of his eventual heirship to the crown, nay more, that Condé Calonne, the old Controller General of Finances, who is stoking trouble abroad, and a considerable list of others are accused of high treason, shall be judged by our High Court of Orléans. But in steps Louis XVI, veto. Put under inspection, under surveillance. If need were, be banished, veto. Veto after veto, your thumbscrew paralyzed. Stormy motions and motion which is no way. Noise and fuliginous fury. Let Brissac and King's Guard be disbanded. Disbanded accordingly they are, after only 2 months of existence. And Carlyle said they wouldn't last long. They're gone already in the same book. Nor are the deputations wanting. Deputations of sections, generally with complaint and denouncement, always with patriot fervour of sentiment. Deputation of women, pleading that they may also be allowed to take pikes and exercise in the Champ de Mars. Why not, ye Amazons, if it be in you? But how often, we say, are these poor Majesty's ministers summoned over, to be questioned, tutored, nay, threatened, almost bullied? Bertrand Mulville has a smooth tongue, the known aristocrat gall in his heart. Scarcely had the august assembly begun considering what was to be done with him, when the hall fills with smoke. Thick sour smoke, no oratory, only wheezing and barking, irremediable. So that the august assembly has to adjourn. No one knows not. O fulginous, confused kingdom of Dis! With thy Tantalus Ixion toils, with thy angry fire floods and streams named of lamentation, why hast thou not thy leave too, that so one might finish? So they're on the Axion wheel, which of course is a device of torture in the underworld of antiquity. And he referenced the kingdom of Dis, which Dante draws great inspiration from in his Inferno. So Carlyle's not holding back here. France has entered its own version of hell. Chapter 8, the Jacobins. If we have the Tantalus Ixion, the Ixion wheel of torture, or think of the fly as well, thinking it's kicking up the dust, we need something that's going to break that wheel. And this is where Carlyle's sympathy, somewhat understanding of the Jacobin cause at this moment comes in a little bit. Because otherwise, you're stuck in the perpetual pain, the fulginous, torturous constitution that will not march. That has to get resolved by something coming in with sheer force. November elections. To the joy of most citizens, nay, the very court supported Pétion rather than Lafayette, so Pétion becomes mayor of Paris. He is much more towards the Jacobin side than what we had previously. So Bailly and his feuillants, long waning like the moon, had to withdraw then, making some sort of obeisance into extinction. Bailly is the old mayor of Paris, and long ago the revolution had gone far enough for him. He is of the feuillants, who were basically monarchists. Not now does Lafayette, as on that Federation Day when his noon was, press his sword firmly on the fatherland's altar, swear in sight of France. No. Now Pétion is in charge. And as a Jacobin, we will have the hammering of pikes, which was not to be prohibited by Mayor Bailly and has been sanctioned by Mayor Pétion, sanctioned by the Legislative Assembly. Stupid Peter Bayle almost made an epigram, though unconsciously and with the patriot world laughing not at it but at him, when he wrote tout va bien, ici le pain manque. All goes well here, food is not to be had. This is the absurd situation the Jacobinists and the extreme left find themselves in. France has never been more patriotic. We're closer than ever to being in the levers of power, the control that we wanted. So everything's going well, but there's no food. Not impotent Parliament, or call it Ecumenical Council, or General Assembly of the Jean-Jacques Churches. Mother Society, namely. The Mother Society with her 300 full-grown daughters. With what we can call little grand daughters trying to walk in every village of France. So this is a sort of device used by the Jacobins, this Mother Society. And it's going to work as a much more functional piece of political machinery than the actual Legislative Assembly. What we can still call little granddaughters trying to walk in every village of France, numerable as Burke thinks by the 100,000. is the true constitution, made not by 1,200 august senators, but by nature herself. So Carlyle sees it as a natural, mother society is a natural constitution. It taps into Carlyle's naturalist beliefs that the paper age, their evangelical Jean-Jacques Rousseau worship in Paris, are actually not going to be the people who make France tick here. It's going to be the mother society. They're the lords of the articles, are Jacobins. They originate debates for the legislative, discuss peace and war, settle beforehand what the legislative is to do. Great is the mother society. She has had the honour to be denounced by Austrian countess. She has extinguished Feuillantism. The Mayor Bailey's school. At least the Feuillant Club. And on the 18th of February has the satisfaction to see it shut. Mother Society has enlarged her locality, stretches now over the whole nave of the church. We have a Jacobin amphitheatre. 3 free peoples of the universe, trinal brotherly flags of England, America and France fly. Citizens who solemnly send over salutations and brotherhood, also tricolour stitched to their own needle. Demoiselle Théroigne recites from the tribune in mid-air her persecutions in Austria, comes leaning on the arm of Joseph Chénier, poet Chénier, to demand liberty for the hapless Swiss of Châteauvieux. Châteauvieux, you recall, these are the Swiss guards who did not get the same leniency that the French regiments got in the Nancy affair. It's part 9. Deputy Brissot perorates from that tribune de Moulin, our wicked Camille, interjecting audibly from below. Coquin. What spirit of patriotism dwelt in men in those times, sat quiet under the oratory of Robespierre. Chapter 9. Minister Roland. Madame Dudon's breakfasts are jingled with new significance. Dumont, but had a word in it. General de Mourier. This foreign portfolio shall ply clarets in the Kaiser. War minister in a bon is washed away by the time flood. Poor Chevalier de Grave, chosen by the court, is fast washing away. So there's a sort of churn in the war ministry. But as a general, de Mourier is the one who's really getting in charge of any tangible defence. And then Charles de Sevran, able engineer officer, mounts suddenly to the War Department. Genevieve Clavier sees an old man realised passing in the Finance Hotel. Long years ago, as a poor Genovese exile, it was borne wondrously on his mind that he was to be French minister, so to be finance minister. So finance minister will go to Clavier, a Genovese-born man, so not even of France. Minister of the Interior, well, that's Roland de la Platrier, he of Lyon. He of this chapter title name. So have the Bicetins, public or private opinion and breakfasts in the Palace Vendôme decided it. So these are just examples Carlyle's giving of who's actually getting into ministerial positions, and he's saying actually this was all decided at Madame Dudon's breakfasts, and this is the mother society actually running the country. Vos non vobis, thus ye labour, but not for yourselves, attributed to Virgil. Brissot and Minister Clavier get too hot an argument. Brissot's head, they say, is getting giddy in this sudden height. So a lot of people here are elevated to positions they never would have dreamed of, as feeble heads do. Envious men insinuate what the wife Roland is minister, and not the husband. It's an interesting side here, though, that Carlyle thinks there's an inherent ability or inability for people to assume positions of power. And those who have that inherent inability get dizzy at the heights, and their heads fill with air. They lose focus, and they also lose an earnestness and a grounding. Whereas those who are cool, calm, and collected, with a vision to enact it quickly, decisively, these are the ones bred for power. Barnave, seeing the Feuillants dispersed and Coblentz so brisk, begs, by way of final recompense, to kiss Her Majesty's hand, augurs not well of a new course, and retires home to Grenoble. There's the end of Barnave, constitutional monarchist, seeing the gig is up here. Remnants of aristocrat saloons call the new ministry Minister Sans-Culotte. The word liberty is never named now except in conjunction with another, liberty and equality. Dumouriez corresponds with Kaunitz, Metternich, and Cobbencel in another style than the Delisat did, strict become stricter. So the language between colonels of these different countries is getting more and more terse. The 20th day of April 1792 has arrived. King and ministers step over to the salle de manège, promulgate how to the matter stands, and poor Louis, with tears in his eyes, as Louis says, proposes that the assembly now do decree war. After due eloquence, war is decreed that night. So finally, 20th of April 1792, war is declared. D'Orléans, with his two sons, is there, looks on, wide-eyed, from the opposite gallery. He, Philippe Galité d'Orléans, who from an aristocratic position of power did so much to settle this in motion, now watches stupefied as the Legislative Assembly declares war on Austria and on his cousins, who are all gathered in Coblentz. Let our three generals on the frontiers look to it therefore, and poor Chevalier de Grave, the war minister, consider what he will do. He loses his head, and merely whirls with them in a totally distracted manner, signing himself at last de Grave, Mayor of Paris, which of course he is not. Whereupon he demits, returns over the Channel, to walk in Kensington Gardens, and austere Servan, the able engineer officer, is elevated to his stead. So this is the churn. Carlyle, beginning of the chapter, stated a number of the churn that's going to happen. So it's going to go from Chevalier de Grave, chosen by the court, then to the engineer Servan, then Geneviève Clavier will become into the finance position. So that's the end of de Grave. He goes off to Kensington, really. He can't handle the fact that as war minister, his nation actually goes to war. Chapter 10, Pétion-National-Pike. Hiding the abyss under vapory rainbows is what is actually happening here. The abyss is, of course, the Jacobin element. Chapter 10, Pétion-National-Pike. So France here is hiding the abyss under vapory rainbows. Stamped your so-called revolt of Nancy into a massacre of Nancy. Jacobin patriotism and dispersed feuillantism are now at death grips and do fight with all weapons. Joseph Chénier, the Jacobin, squire of Théroigne, to his brother André the Feuillant, André Chénier the poet. Mayor Pétion, so brother against brother, Mayor Pétion to Deponter no more. And for the space of 2 months there is nowhere peace for the thought of man. So Feuillantism is like the last hope of constitutional monarchism, and it does put up a last grasp here. Gloria and Excelsius, the 40 Swiss, are at last gotten amnesty. So this is at the Châteauvieux, the 3rd Regiment in the Nancy affair. They get amnestied. Festivals, though, despite all this, are not wanting. Repasts there are, countenanced by Mayor Pétion, Saint-Antoine. So Mayor Pétion is creating repasts, opera repasts, these small little festivals. That creates a narrative, that creates people wanting to fuse themselves into the narrative with jollity, but also with a wider culture. Where's the feuillant element of this? Where's their vision of France right now? Their positive vision, other than being against the Pétions, and so on. Saint-Antoine and the strong ones of the Halles defiling through the Jacobin Club. Honourable persons standing gossip by name. They call it the Pétion-National-Pike. So that's what Carlyle gets at. And it's interesting he calls that chapter Pétion-National-Pike, because is that the difference? You create something like a festival, something that creates a camaraderie and a spirit and a cohesive community around it. Whereas the Feuillants don't have that. Of course, their club has been disbanded. Chapter 11, the Hereditary Representative. Gouvion quitted the legislative hall and parliamentary duties in disgust and despair. So, of course, this is going to be how much of those who have hereditary representation in the Legislative Assembly can be trusted now. We were at it. They're at war with Austria, but they're at war with feudalism more largely. Between the Austrians and the Jacobins, there is nothing but a soldier's death for it, says Gouvion as he quits. Lafayette himself is looking altogether dubious. In place of beating the Austrians is about writing to denounce Jacobins. So the patriots don't like the look of that. Without armies, without generals. And the Cimmerian night has gathered itself. At the 24th of May, there is the decree for the banishment of priests. So things are moving quickly now. Whether the hereditary representative is for us or against us amidst all this tumult. Let the hereditary representative consider it well, the decree of the priests, then. Well, camp of 20,000, do you agree with this? By heaven, he answers the king. Veto, veto. I still have this one power. I'm just going to keep chucking it in there and stopping your constitution from marching. Strict Roland, Minister of the Interior, as we had in a previous chapter, hands in his letter to the king. His plain-spoken letter, King Louis has the benefit of reading overnight. He reads, inwardly digests. The next morning, the whole Patriot ministry found itself turned out. It is the 13th of June, 1792. So the Constitution now will not march. That's plain. Dumouriez the many-counselled. He, with one Duranton called Minister of Justice, does indeed linger for a day or two in rather suspicious circumstances. The whole cabinet resigns. Apart from Dumouriez, of course, the ever-shifty man, kind of lingers a little bit to see which way the wind's blowing on this. Unhappy Queen, unhappy Louis. The two vetoes were so natural. Are not the priests martyrs, also friends? This camp of 20,000, could it be other than the stormfullest sans-culottes? Natural, and yet to France unendurable. And there we see it. What is now natural to Louis as King of France has become unnatural to the Legislative Assembly, which is said to represent France. The constitutional monarchy has failed. With face of hope turned now on the Legislative Assembly and now on Austria and Koblenz and round generally on the chaplet of chances, an ancient kingship is reeling, spinning. One knows not whitherward on the flood of things. Chapter 12. Procession of the Black Breeches. But is there a thinking man in France who in these circumstances can persuade himself that the Constitution will march? Brunswick is stirring. He, in the few days now, will march. That's Brunswick in the Holy Roman Empire. Till France be as Poland, i.e. carved up by greater powers, and its rights of man become a Prussian gibbet. Lafayette indicts his emphatic letter to the legislation against Jacobinism. So, of course, that man, that thinking man, is Lafayette, that the last hope, as Carlyle says. But it will not heal the unhealable. Forward, ye patriots, whose audacity has no limits. It is you now that must either do or die. Will hypothetic prophecies, will jingle and fanfaronade demolish the veto? Or will the veto, secure in its Tuileries chateau, remain undemolishable by these? Barbaroux, dashing away his tears, writes to the Marseille municipality that they must send him 6,000 men who know how to die. Qui savent mourir. No wet-eyed message this, but a fire-eyed one, which will be obeyed. So we had Barbaroux before, in the chapter on Avignon, where he was down in Marseille and can rally a lot of patriots, a lot of pro-revolutionary forces down there in Marseille. He had them rallied to Avignon before, or to Arles, to Nîmes, or any of these counter-revolutionary spots in the south. Now, he's trying to rally them to Paris to deal with the king. What processions have we not seen? Corpus Christi and Legendre waiting in his gig, bones of Voltaire with bullock chariots and goadsmen in Roman costume, feasts of Chateauvieux and Simonian, Gouvion funerals, Rousseau sham funerals, and the baptism of Pétion-National-Pike. Nevertheless, this procession has a character of its own. Tricolour ribbons streaming aloft from the pike heads. Epigraph, que d'aristocrate. Aristocrat's heart. And more striking, still probably the standard of the host, a pair of black breeches, old black breeches, tremblez tirons, voilà les sans-culottes. Tremble, tyrants, here are the sans indispensables. The black breeches agitate themselves, impatient, the cannon wheels grumble, the many-footed hosts tramp on. It reaches the Salle de Manège. National Assembly has adjourned till the evening. Perhaps this shut lake, finding no in-gate, will retire to its sources again and disappear in peace. Alas, not yet. These black breeches want a bit more than that. King Louis, his door, being beaten on, opens it. So, where do they march to, of course? The Tuileries. Stands with free bosom, asking, "What do you want?" The sans-culottic flood recoils, awestruck. Veto, patriot ministers, remove veto. Louis does not want courage. He has even the higher kind called moral courage, though only the passive half of that. The National Assembly is adjourned. Tricolour municipals avail almost nothing. Mayor Pétion tarries absent. Authority is none. The Queen, with her children and sister Elizabeth in tears and terror, not for themselves only, are sitting behind the barricaded tables and grenadiers. Mayor Pétion harangues, many men harangue. Finally, Commandant Santerre defiles, passes out with his sans-culottism by the opposite side of the chateau, so they eventually disperse the crowd from in front of the Tuileries. Thus has the age of chivalry gone and that of hunger come. Thus does all needing sans-culottism look in the face of roi, regulator, king, or able man, and find that he has nothing to give it. So to Carlyle, this moment of the Black Breeches coming right up to the front door of where Louis was, to see him on the balcony, to kind of stare power straight in the face and find that he's not that powerful, that's the moment. He's actually lost his divine kingship. This, verily, am I, but God heaven, is that thou? This is what the Black Breeches think, and depart not knowing what to make of it. The fates know what. This is the world-famous 20th of June, more worthy to be called the Procession of the Black Breeches. So where will Louis go now? Could not flee, could not save his France via veto. They're at war with Austria. There's only one thing that's coming next, and that's going to be the Marseillaise.